So
I started recording.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Sevandi Ranasinghe, for agreeing to carry out this first session on the series of theories for management research. Dr. Sevandi would not be a stranger to many of you. She's from our faculty, from the Faculty of Management and Finance. She's a senior lecturer at the faculty and at the MOS department. And she has done her BBA and MBA from University of Colombo and her PhD from Glasgow University, UK. And her area of research or her research interest lies in post-colonialism and feminism in organization studies, and also on emancipatory research. So I couldn't think of anybody better to talk about feminist theory. And I hope that you will engage in the discussion that we plan to carry out after the initial presentation and get the maximum out of this session. So over to you, Sevandi.
Thank you, Miss. Some of these things, it's very difficult to give a talk in about 45 minutes or so. And I don't want this session to be a boring lecture, which extends to an hour, hours, etc. So I think what I'm trying to do is show some pointings where people who are interested can do a bit more reading on this, and then would have access to different forms of thinking on these lines. So I did develop some slides. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is about feminist theory. So kind of, it's not very recent, but it is kind of still, seemed, as I mentioned, fashionable. Intersectionality research or intersectionality studies in feminist theory seems to be something that everybody is interested in. A lot of people are interested in, at least, since the last half a decade or so. And post-colonial developments, I see post-colonial developments still taking place. There was a time when I felt that perhaps, people are not so interested in post-colonial development. So for one thing, I remember making a presentation in Edinburgh in a conference one time, and there was one professor, English, this lady, she was a finance professor actually, when I was talking about this colonial, post-colonial development, and what she was saying is, isn't this over? Isn't colonialism over? I mean, is there anything we need to talk about still? So then, there was something that I need to say that, yes, in a way it could be politically over, but the consequences consequences of colonialism is still felt, and we are still experiencing the material legacies of colonialism and also ideologies of colonialism, and also the new forms of neo-colonialism is still felt, and hence the relevance is very much there. So there is certain forms of resistance even when you're using feminist theory, and also when you're using post-colonial theory, especially to a Western audience. They do have certain forms of, especially when you are going to UK and talking about, you guys colonized us and this is what we are feeling. It's a little bit controversial in a sense as well. So it's not very controversial when it comes to Sri Lanka, because we are very much, we understand what we are talking about, but when the audience is a little different, it needs to be palatable as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about feminist approaches and about theorizing gender and organizations. There are two forms of theorizing which we will, which I'm going to talk about, and about intersectionality and about post-colonial feminism. That is where my my reading mostly lies on that element of post-colonial feminism, and then critiques of intersectionality. And also perhaps there's a possible combination between intersectionality and post-colonial feminism that I see in certain recent publications these days. Okay, so coming to feminist approaches, Kalas and Smirmich was I came across this through Pavitra Miss. I actually audited one of her classes when I was doing masters, and she was doing feminism in contemporary management thought. And through auditing that class, I think that is why auditing is so important. And it was Pavitra Miss who talked about Kalas and Smirmich, and that is where I actually opened up and read on Kalas and Smirmich, and they talk about these different forms of so they talk about different forms of theorizing or looking at feminism, and they talk about the developments of feminist thinking. So this is so important. The other one, another important element is they connect it to organizations, because feminist theory and feminist approaches seems to be very much out there, in sociological research, in psychological research, in so many other forms of research. But when it comes to organization studies, it seems to be not so, we couldn't actually see very much of a link, but it made it, Kalas and Smirmich publication made it so much more easier. So they talk about liberal feminism, which is the start of liberal political thinking of about equality, etc. And they also have a different brands called radical feminism, which are not interested merely in reforming the system, but they want radical transformations of systems and structures within organizations or society. Psychoanalytic feminism is actually targeting the dominance of psychoanalytics, or let's say Freud, and the Freudian analysis is critically criticized by psychoanalytic feminism. Marxist feminism is actually in a way critiquing Marx, saying, Marx, you talked about class of capital and labor, but you didn't actually talk about women. Women were also, when it comes to labor, they are also kind of a class. So then we have socialist feminism, which is kind of an extension of Marxist feminism and a combination of so many others. And then you have post-structural, postmodern feminism, or we also call it French, French feminism. Okay. And third world post-colonial. I have a real issue with this use of word third world, but they say so-called third world, or we call it post-colonial feminism. So this is actually where I actually got exposed to, okay, there are different forms of feminism and different theorizations of feminism in different ways. And then Kalas et al. In 2014, I have references at the end, so if anybody's interested, you can actually go through them. Theorizing gender and organization, they actually show these two different forms of theorizing. You can either theorize gender in organizations or gendering organizations. So there are different ways of looking at it. And the most common form of looking at this is gender in organizations, because I guess management is very much functional, and management tend to be a functionalist, fall into a functionalist paradigm, because they are looking constantly at how to do things better, how to control something. So gender in organizations are also quite very much a functionalist way of looking at gender and these elements. So gender in organizations, literature tend to assume people as sex-gendered beings acting within the confines of a neutral container, the organization. So the organization is neutral, and the organizational functions as organization functions as a stage on which individuals act. But with few exceptions, the stage is rarely examined. So we don't, examine the stage. We don't question the stage. We actually look at how we can do things better within the stage, given as it is. So I'll talk about gendering organizations a little later. So gender in organizations echoes this liberal feminist thinking, where they look at issues related. So literature here tries to look at issues related to status of women in organizations, underrepresentation at higher levels. So this glass ceiling metaphors, all these are actually used here in gender in organizations. Generally about women in management and the problems they face, women in leadership, that kind of issues are actually looked at here. The study of gender in organization is still primarily the study of the conditions women face in organizations centered on a fulcrum of difference. So to look at gender in organizations, there are different kinds of theories are used. That's what the authors are saying, could be social role theory, status characteristics theory, or different forms of leadership theories are also used to understand this. Scholars in all gender in organizations, theoretical traditions are seeking to chart generalizable patterns resulting in observed disparities between women and men. So it's kind of a functionalist, not kind, it is a functionalist way of doing it. And also they use quantitative methods to do this as well. Though the term gender is used, all these approaches rely on body counting as evidence that something may not be right when sex inequality exists. So now how many members in the board, how many women are there, how many are in the parliament? So that's what gender in organizations, there's nothing wrong with this. As I want to say, this is one way of looking at gender. So in fact, none of these approaches theorize gender. They are primarily applications of conventional psychological and sociological concepts to explain the problem of low numbers of women in positions of authority in organizations, and not about understanding the reproduction and persistence of gender or sex inequality. So that's, I directly took it from the authors. So that is where gendering organizations actually come. As a critique to gender in organizations. So here in gendering organizations, they try to denaturalize the common sense of gender using processual, social, constructionist theoretical approaches, rather than positioning individuals at the center of inquiry and assuming binary notions of women and men or feminine or masculine roles. The focus instead is on gender as a social institution, which is socially accomplished through gender relations. This brings the analyst's attention not simply to the sex of participants as embodied actors, but to the cultural production of their subjectivities as the material production of their lives, including the ongoing production, reproduction along gender lines of social structuring or structuring. So that is where I am actually positioned in. So gendering organizations is a kind of a social constructivist understanding of gender, sex, conceiving of these as social processes. As I mentioned, ontologically, gender is an emergent feature of social situations, not something that one has as an individual, but something humans do. So it's a social construction. Sex and gender simultaneously enacted social processes contributing to the production of institutional context, such as organization as gendered spaces. Understanding the production and reproduction of inequality in situated circumstances where gender is done as power relation. So it's a lot about power and domination that is actually looked at here through relations of subordination and domination. So theorizing here is mostly done through critical feminist philosophies, including socialist, post-structuralist theorizations, often addressing the historical and cultural reproductions of a patriarchal system where domination of and inequality are the norm. So whether it is, so we are looking at certain forms of domination and subordination, and we are also looking at certain forms of cultural reproduction. While I'm saying that, all these critical theories are also to some extent looking at certain forms of emancipation. So that's what I'm, don't assume that these individuals, gender or otherwise, are victims in a sense, but those who are able to liberate themselves in some form. So that's what critical theory is actually looking at as well. All right, so so that's where I'm actually focused on when it comes to these two forms of theorizing gender and organizing. So it's most like gendering organizations rather than gender in organizations. And coming to intersectionality, when I was actually writing my, trying to develop my PhD proposal, I was told to look at, what are the emerging debates that are there in an area that is of interest to me. So when I was reading these, I saw that there was a review article that talked about how there's very little research on intersectionality, using intersectionality perspective. Some say it's a paradigm, some say it's a methodology, some different writers say different things about intersectionality. So I was so fascinated about what is this intersectionality, and why is it gaining so much of attention in feminist research. So if you look at how intersectionality research has come about, it actually came from the publication of Kimberly Crenshaw. She is a Black feminist, or she's a professor in legal studies in a very prestigious university in the US. And she's talking about race, and she's not only talking about gender but many elements of gender, especially when it comes to legal legislative elements in US. So even today, we hear Kimberly Crenshaw when it comes to critical race theory that is being an issue in the US, where critical race theory is being trying to be taught in schools in the US. So a lot of people have different ideas of what critical race theory is, but none of them actually know what it is. And Kimberly Crenshaw is one of the leading researchers on those lines. So critical race theory is where they're looking at even a country like US after civil rights movement has taken place, the legal processes are still discriminatory towards certain races in the country. So that's what Kimberly Crenshaw is actually looking at. So when Kimberly Crenshaw wrote this essay in 1989, she was actually thinking about a metaphor of this highways, one highway connecting to another, and you can't actually figure out what is actually the problem. The problem is multidimensional, and many things are taking place at the same time. So that's why she brought in this metaphor of an intersection within a highway to talk about so many things that are connected to another thing. So she was saying that it is not just women who are, it's not just gender. If you are a Black woman, your predicament is much more dire than you are a white woman. So it's not just gender per se, gender mixed with certain forms of race or ethnicity, as we call it in Sri Lanka, becomes a little bit more contentious. So when you become a female who is of a minority ethnicity, and also if you are in a socially lower class and your education is low, then your experience is very much more different. So you cannot generalize to say that all women experience this, etc. When you have these different things you're experiencing together, that affects you more than it affects just let's say me as a female who is educated, who have certain forms of financial security, let's say, and also a woman coming from a majority ethnic group. So I cannot be talking about all women, because different groups of women have different experiences, And we cannot use one feminist theory per se to talk about them. So intersectionality perspective was so hot and so exciting, especially to Black feminism, because they brought in these other elements there. So, okay, so intersectionality research has its roots in feminism of Black women and other women of color. Kimberly Crenshaw, a critical legal theorist and anti-discrimination legislation specialist in the US, introduced the term intersectionality in an essay published in 1989. I have the reference of that as well at the end. So for those who are interested in reading the start. So intersectional insights have moved from the margins of feminist studies to the center. Now, the problem with intersectional research when I was trying to use it was, they are not, intersectionality is not a controversial word like feminism even. So when you say intersectionality, it has this very generalized or appeal to everybody who may or may not be interested in certain brands of feminism. So what happens was this intersectionality was used largely by liberal feminists to talk about how we can all work together in a culture that is diverse. So it went into intersectionality went although it was a critical perspective, that was the beginning of intersectionality, was a critical route. It was, I wouldn't say hijacked per se, but it was kind of used largely by liberal feminists to talk about gender in organizations. So that is where certain forms of issues were coming in. Current intersectionality scholarship is strongly, that's why intersectional insights have moved from the margins of feminist studies to the center, because it was appealing even to the liberal feminists. Current intersectionality scholarship is strongly focused on stressing, describing, and theorizing multiple forms of inequality among different subgroups of women. So what happened with liberal feminists is they used this as another variable. So gender is a variable, race is another variable, or ethnicity is another variable, class is another variable. So they use this as variables, and intersectionality became very popular in feminist research, especially in liberal feminist, as an extension of liberal feminist agenda. So when you read this Leslie McCall's seminal article, The Complexity of Intersectionality, it is so this is actually a very good development of liberal feminist research to some extent, where they try to incorporate a lot of others as well. So this stream of literature led to the integration of intersectional insights into quantitative inequality research and thus into the social science mainstream. The focus of her account is clearly not on marginalized social and political actors in their struggles, but rather on research categories, on the question of which categories are chosen for a particular study and how these categories are employed. So there's nothing wrong with it. I think in Leslie McCall's article, she used wages, and she used how wages are different in different forms of groups. So that was a very interesting research, but one that was mainstream. So hence I found it very problematic for me to use. I didn't know that intersectional research could be used in any other way, because it was largely used in liberal feminist lines. Then, so when I was reading Kerner, 2017 in Current Sociology, she brings in ideas of Iris Young, where she actually tries to take back, in a sense, intersectionality and try to locate it in a critical lens on so Iris Young examines issues of intersectionality with an interest in theorizing structural forms of injustice beyond the liberal difference blind equality paradigm, and in thinking about suitable ways of redressing these. So Young differentiates between politics of positional difference. So there's two where Young talks about politics of positional difference and politics of cultural difference. So her focus is politics of positional difference, And politics of cultural difference is something that are quite appealing to other forms of multicultural kind of theorizing. So, okay, so Young differentiate between politics of position difference that concentrate on the issue of structural inequality and politics of cultural difference that are mainly concerned with matters of freedom. According to Young, both approaches are important and complement one another, but politics of cultural difference would reproduce problematic dominant social norms rather than challenge them. So that's kind of the same gendering and gender in organizations and gendering organization kind of thing. So so intersectionality. So I am actually changed in my thinking that intersectionality is not only something that is used by inequality researchers looking at gender as a variable, gender and other forms of inequality as variables, but rather it can also be used to look at structural inequalities from a social constructivist perspective. Okay, so right, so now when I was doing my PhD, there was a question about intersectionality, and I thought that would be a question that would be asked by my examiners in my viva. Why didn't you use intersectionality? As you know, I was in a Western. I did my PhD in a Western country, and I thought it would be these Western examiners would be asking me why did I actually use post-colonial feminism and not intersectionality, because it is kind of a buzz at the time. So then what I actually tried to do is I tried to distance myself from intersectionality and say that it was not suitable for me because of these different reasons. But my critique is largely on these liberal feminist lenses rather than on a critical lens, which was not very dominant at the time. So critiquing intersectionality, intersectionality could explore interaction. So this is something that I had written in my thesis, and I just cut and pasted it here. Intersectionality could explore the interactions between gender, race, and other categories of difference in individual lives, social practices, institutional arrangements, and cultural ideologies, and the outcome of these interactions in terms of power, claiming a theoretical potential to ground any form of inequality. So when it comes to post-colonial feminism, they are very, very, I would say, hesitant about this universal sisterhood. So post-colonial feminists don't want to be part of a universal sisterhood. So that is what I was trying to actually target and aim to say. Intersectionality seemed to be now used as a way to address this universal sisterhood of inequality, etc. So that's not something that post-colonial feminists would be interested in. So claiming a theoretical potential to ground any form of inequality and multiple forms of inequality present anywhere. So the Black feminist agenda in intersectionality involves bringing race to the forefront as a significant element of oppression. But race is not an important element for post-colonial women. Spivak draws our attention to this. So Spivak's writing is also referenced. So Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak is one of the most significant writers of most influential writers of post-colonialism and post-colonial feminism. So Spivak says, clearly, if you are poor, Black and female, you get it in 3 ways. If, however, this formulation is moved from the first world context to the post-colonial, which is not identical with the third world context, the description of Black or of color loses persuasive significance. Okay, so I was trying to say post-colonial women were much more subaltern, in a sense, much more dominated, in a sense, more than Black women were, especially when it comes to a Western country to a post-colonial context. So, and also Carbing and Eddinheim used to say something like this: intersectionality, even though intended as a critical concept and derived from a much needed feminist intervention, has thus been successful through a lack of ontology, and this lack has in some cases led to a diminishing of the explicitly structuralist ontology of Black feminists, but also a delegitimization of a post-structuralist, post-Marxist ontology that does not share this dream of a common feminist language. So the critique is not that intersectionality is unable to do it, whereas Black feminists actually did do this at the start. The fact that intersectionality has now lost its focus and is now more in this dream of a common feminist language. That was the critique that Carbin and Edinheim was trying to do. What we have found within the field of intersectionality then is not only a refusal to deal with and engage in feminist theories, and especially post-structuralist, post-colonial and other anti-foundationalist ontologies, but a refusal to recognize that these feminisms cannot and should not be included in the field of intersectionality. So this is very political. So when you do read post-colonial feminist writing, it is very political. It is very critical of, that is how you are trying to make or clear a space to this other, the post-colonial feminist or post-colonial women's words and works. So this is a very critical way in which that they were trying to. So this is actually from my thesis, and this is the way in which I said I'm not part of intersectionality. But as you say, you can always argue in any way that you want to, whatever the position that you want to take. So post-colonial theory. So coming to that critique, I'm coming to post-colonial theory, where post-colonial feminism is located. So post-colonial feminism is located in feminist thinking as well as post-colonial thinking. Hence, we need to get a kind of an understanding, a brief understanding of a post-colonial theory. It is not a theory in the general understanding of the word theory. It is an eclectic theory. You know, the word eclectic theory, I only figured out when I was doing my PhD. I didn't know there were theories which we can call eclectic theories. So post-colonial theory is synonymously called post-colonial studies, as it involves a collection of work by scholars who argue for a voice of other located in the margins of Western thought. So, so before the publication of Edward Said's 1978 publication of Orientalism, which is kind of a key domain defining movements that actually came with his publication. Even before Edward Said's writing, there were so many African writers writing about this. If you take Frantz Fanon, for example, talking about Algeria. So there were a lot of writers, whether it's Indian writers, whether it was African writers, there were so many who were in this critique from the beginning. So, post-colonial thinking critique was used, but it was not coming to a mainstream because these writers were not in the Western universities. Said was actually I can't remember the university in US. The other person who is in post-colonial research is Homi Bhabha, who is from University of Oxford. Spivak, another dominant writer, is from university. I'm not sure whether it's UCLA, but these are significant Western universities that they came and wrote. Hence, the legitimacy was there, which was not there for these African writers and these Indian writers who were talking about post-colonialism for quite a long time. And there were also some. Thank you, Pavitra. Spivak was from Columbia. Wonderful. So it's a very, very significant university. There were instances where certain forms of African writers were saying, this is my final writing. I will not engage in the English language to express these sentiments because I don't want to engage in this colonial language. So there is that form of writing as well, where the but when you don't do that, you don't actually, you're not able to, take your voice forward. So there are issues like that as well. Okay, so post-colonial theory provides a retrospective reflection on colonialism. All right, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Pavitra. So post-colonial theory provides a retrospective reflection on colonialism for present-day realities, and it voices the need to question the uncontested hegemony of Western knowledge. Why are we studying this? Why are we, focused on these elements? Why are we dressed like this? Why do we speak like this? All these, or why is this knowledge considered as knowledge? Is something that they are actually concerned about. When you take another group of post-colonial writers, we have another group called Subaltern Studies Collective. So Subaltern Studies Collective is a group of researchers, writers in India who is trying to, they are history researchers, and they are trying to rewrite the history from below. So history is actually something that has been written from the people who are dominant, and you have only kind of one perspective of history, the history of the most dominant people, or the hegemonic discourses are the ones that are actually there in history. So they try to rewrite history from those who are marginalized. So that's the project of Subaltern Studies Collective, which also consists of the part of post-colonial theory as well. Okay, so post-colonial theory is loosely constructed, eclectic theory that enables researchers to explore diverse issues and critiques, drawing inspiration from multiple theoretical positions. Hence, okay, eclectic theory is exactly what this is. It means it's not something that is stable. It doesn't have variables. It doesn't have antecedents, and it has many assumptions. And when you actually theorizing, you take certain authors and they are writing to argue your points. And so it is not something that can be connected as one theory. Many different writers talk about many different things. That's why some say that it's so difficult to even critique post-colonial theory, because critiques run out of ways in which to critique, because there are different ways in which that critique can also be refuted. And also, if you take, for example, post-colonial theory has been, different writers have used different lenses. For example, if you take Homi Bhabha's writing is very much Michel Foucault's inspirations of Foucauldian writing. When you take Gayatri Spivak, she was anti-Foucauldian, and she was very much Marxian, Gramscian. So she drew inspiration from Karl Marx, as well as from Antonio Gramsci, and also Derrida. So there's a lot of, and also if you take Homi Bhabha, Foucauldian, as well as from these deconstruction theorists have also been drawn to so that so many other theories have been used within post-colonial theory to argue certain things, or talk about certain things, and hence it's a very loosely constructed. And when I was actually trying to use post-colonial theory, I was lost because I didn't know what to use exactly, because different writers are talking about different things. Where do I what do I actually get from this is something that was difficult. That difficulty lies because of its eclectic nature. I think that is quite predominant when it comes to critical research as well, I guess. So when it comes to post-colonial feminism kind of critiques post-colonial theories as well, because feminist concerns were not met in post-colonial theory. So post-colonial feminism did focus a bit more on feminist agenda within post-colonial theory. So that's where we come to post-colonial feminism. So post-colonial feminism may appear to be a perspective that is derived from combining two theories, post-colonialism and feminism. However, okay, so when it comes to this writing of Rajan and Park, what they say is it is neither a subset of post-colonialism nor a variety of feminism. So different people can say different things. So Rajan and Park, for instance, see post-colonial feminism as an intervention that is changing the configurations of both post-colonial and feminist studies. So it goes on to a different dimension rather than a subset of one or the other. So both these theories are critical theories, that is post-colonial theory and feminist theory. Both these theories are critical theories and their focus is on marginalized group of people. In post-colonial theory, the focus is on post-colonial other at the margins of Western discourse. In feminism, the focus is on women experiencing marginalization. Both these theories have similar aspirations of emancipation for the category of people they represent. So these two important writers are there if you're interested in post-colonial feminism. One is Gayatri Spivak, and it is Gayatri Spivak's writing is notoriously difficult to read, if I can say this term, notoriously difficult to read. The essay titled "Can the Subaltern Speak" is kind of a absolute seminal article. If you read it, you are going to be, I felt wow when I was reading it. I don't think I have been wowed by an essay as much as Gayatri Spivak's writing of Can the Subaltern Speak. One thing is it challenges you to your core, because it starts, Gayatri or Spivak starts with some form of a debate of Foucault and Deleuze. So she's actually, as you start reading the essay, it's a critique of a debate. So then you wonder, what is this debate? I don't know what this debate is. Then before you read this, this writing, you have to read the debate. So then you stop reading Can the Subaltern Speak, go to the debate, read the Foucault and Deleuze's that particular article, that particular conversation that has been published, and then you come back to the subaltern studies, Can the Subalterns Speak? And I found it fascinating how she actually brings in she also brings in psychoanalytic feminism in this writing, where she's actually critiquing Freud or bringing Freudian analysis also, where she's actually talking about widow immolation, the practice of sati in India, and where the banning of sati was considered, where she brings in the Freudian analogies, where she's saying the white man is saving the brown woman from the brown man, which is a Freudian reference. And of course, it's absolutely fascinating to read. Basically, you can't understand in the first read or multiple reads. So it's a very challenging read, and one that I absolutely enjoyed reading, Can the Subaltern Speak? And Mohanty's article, Under Western Eyes, is another seminal article of post-colonial feminism. Mohanty is also widely quoted in post-colonial feminism. Mohanty uses these binary opposites of how Western women are seen and how the non-Western women and post-colonial women are seen. So actually, she brings in this binary view that is used by Edward Said in his Orientalism argument. So, but later on, there's a lot of critique about Orientalism, how it just reduces the analysis to the binary opposites. But of course, these two are the most widely renowned writers of post-colonial feminism. Right. So when you are using post-colonial feminism as a lens, there are certain notions that you can use within post-colonial feminism to understand, or to argue, or let's say to use as lenses to talk about or to theorize. So these are certain forms of theorizing notions that I thought is a lot that I thought is what a lot of post-colonial feminists have used, and some of them I have used myself. I use subalternity why also. Subalternity is a word that was used by Antonio Gramsci to talk about low ranked soldiers when it came to Italy. So that while it was used by Antonio, the term subalternity was used by Antonio Gramsci, it was actually brought to feminist studies by Gayatri Spivak. So she actually defines subalternity as a group of people who are unable to speak, because she was talking about women who are being burnt and have no words to speak. So the voiceless are the ones who she actually defined as subalternity in a stricter sense. But when it comes to organizational studies, you cannot bring in that kind of voiceless, absolutely voiceless people. So we do use subalternity to talk about marginalized women who are very much marginalized in multiple forms. Like the research that I did for my PhD, where I talked about plantation Tamil women who are subaltern because of the way in which they are marginalized by society, by culture, by gender, by when it comes to capitalist organization, by the way in which they, if you take Marxian labor process theory, you can say they are in the bottom of the hierarchy of the labor process. So subalternity to talk about is something that you can use as a lens to talk about marginalized groups of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to be women per se. It can also be used to talk about marginalized groups in general. Post-colonial subjectivity is another element that has been, notion that has been used. The kind of experiences that post-colonial men or women are experiencing, which is different to that of the Western forms of subjectivity, we might call. So there's also that notion of post-colonial subjectivity being used. Issues of representation and misrepresentation. So post-colonial feminism or post-colonial studies in general talks about who has a right to represent whom. How dare you represent me because you have no idea what I'm feeling. So that's what post-colonial feminists are actually critiquing the white feminists, white liberal feminists mostly, saying, how can you represent me because you have no idea about how I'm feeling and how I'm actually doing or what I'm experiencing, etc. So there are issues of representation and misrepresentation that is discussed as a notion within post-colonial feminism. Reflexivity is something that is absolutely discussed, where the person who is writing and sharing the voices, you don't actually represent the voice of somebody, you share the voice of somebody. Even the terminology is used. In reflexivity, the researcher have to declare who the researcher is, where she comes from, where he or she comes from, and what kind of thinking they have or she has, and how you situate yourself within this research, and how you see your participants and the research in general. Another notion that is used, double colonization, it's something that I used in my research to say that, it's not just colonization. Post-colonial feminists don't talk about just colonization like post-colonial research. They talk about double colonization, because women are not, post-colonial women are not just have to endure certain consequences of colonialism, but also have to endure patriarchy. So it's double colonization that was also used. All right. Then we have, of course, something that I like. Yes, there is so much of domination, but there is also agency. So subaltern agency, a post-colonial agency is a forms of ways in which people express their voices, where they talk about, women are not just victims of these forms of domination. Like James Scott talks about weapons of the weak. Weak also have certain forms of weapons in which they can express themselves, resist, and if you read certain forms of literature, they also talk about silence as a form of resistance. So voice used as resistance and silence used as resistance as well. So there are different forms of literature that talks about post-colonial and subaltern forms of agency. Even in her this fascinating story of this Can the Subaltern Speak, Gayatri Spivak's seminal essay, she actually talks about a relative of hers who killed herself. And she talked about that. Now, she talked at the time, so I think that issue, that particular incident had happened in the 1930s. One of her great aunts, Gayatri Spivak's great aunts, had killed herself by hanging. And she actually talks about that because she says, in the family, what I'm trying to say is how Gayatri Spivak brings these Foucauldian analyses and critiques and then all that, and then she also brings in her own family history into that essay, which is absolutely fascinating, where she talks about a hanging of a female, and she says during those days, if a female hangs herself, it is considered it's a result of some form of illegitimate passion, and perhaps because this female was pregnant. But this great aunt of hers waited until she had her period to show the society that it was not because of an illegitimate passion that she killed herself, but because of something with regard to the independence movement, where she was a militant activist, and she was supposed to engage in some form of resistance, as use a bomb or something, and she didn't want to do that, and she killed herself or something. So Gayatri doesn't actually support forms of suicide or by hanging, but she mostly talks about this incident in a different way. So it's kind of an agency also to show that even sati was used by certain women to express certain resistance against the colonial domination, etc. So it's used in a different lens in post-colonial studies. Okay, so coming to the end, I think I took more than what I should have taken. So can we combine the two? Because initially I talked about intersectionality research is very much far-fetched and doesn't speak to post-colonial feminist aspirations and needs and assumptions, etc. However, there are what we see now is there is certain forms of mutual solidarity between these, especially because intersectionality is coming from Black feminism, and Black feminism was very influential in developing post-colonial feminism as well. So there is mutual solidarity and gains between these two streams of thinking. So I would like to end with what Kerner had to say. So current intersectionality scholarship is strongly focused on stressing, describing and theorizing multiple forms of inequality among different subgroups of women. Post-colonial theories not only focused on power relations among women, but have also emphasized reflections upon interactions among feminists, stressing their dissatisfaction with how the dispersed project of global feminism has been run and suggesting new forms of political interaction and solidarity across differences. Both perspectives could be conceptualized as complementary and that they may both profit from being combined. So whether I haven't seen these two being used in an empirical study still. Perhaps there are, which I have missed, but it is something that is interesting to explore. So these are the references of what I talked about. So if there are anything that you'd like to discuss, I'm very much open. Sorry for taking about 15 minutes extra.
No problem at all. Yes, anybody, any clarifications you need, questions you have?
I'm Samari.
Yes, Samari?
I would like to know whether in the recent past, in the very recent literature, is there like a kind of a biasness towards intersectionality and then having to do studies more, or is it more like
you mean when you say biasness, what you mean is there a trend towards intersectionality research?
In terms of because you also said that at one point it was becoming quite a buzzword or a buzz.
It still is, Samar, especially when it comes to a critical movement of intersectionality. It definitely is. It definitely is. So intersectionality research agenda have not been what do you call it? Staturized. So there's still a lot of potential within intersectionality research, and a lot of journals who are willing to publish intersectionality research today rather than other forms of feminist research.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samari, for that question.
So one thing I have seen when you were supervising and when I had the opportunity to sometimes examine those proposals and research that you have supervised, I see some very interesting theories that the students present. Like, for example, I can't remember the exact name of the theory where these the student did a study on air.
Yes.
Yes.
About Henry Lebotsky's space. About theorizing space. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And then recent proposal also, I read a nice theory. So I'm sure you would have suggested some of the theories, or the students would have suggested, but you would have also been aware of those theories. So this theory about space, are those, do they come under feminist theory, or are they part of feminist theory, or are they used to study, you know, gender in organizations or gendering organizations?
I think, Miss, it's not used directly as a feminist theory, but what I see in feminist theories is that they are very absorbent. You know, they absorb everything that they can use. When it comes to psychoanalytic feminism, is also the same. The psychoanalytic elements are used by feminists to absorb and then, you know, develop their own ways of doing it. So this, I think, Taylor and Spicer's organizational space writing was, it's a, so feminist research or feminist theory can be considered as a critical theory, especially gendering organizations. That kind of is a critical theory. And therefore, all critical perspectives can be seen from a feminist lens. So when you are looking at space, you can also look at gendering of space. It's not a feminist theory per se, but you can use it from the lenses of feminism. One of the easiest ways that I found it to be claimed as feminist is where you look at patriarchy in certain forms of domination that they experience. So if you're looking at how women are being dominated and how their space is being constructed in a particular way, construction and reconstruction of a particular space, you can talk about it from a feminist lens, but it is not feminist theory per se. So I guess that's the way in which it is being developed also.
So basically, you can use these different theories, this space theory, then social role theory, all these theories in studies that would come under feminist, the broader lens of feminist theory. So
yes,
you would not be using, only feminist theory, or is it ontology, or a little bit of explanation on that as well, how other theories can be used together with feminist theory, Sawandi?
That's a very good question, because that was a question that was asked for me when I was doing my PhD as well, sorry, my Viva, where they were asking, is post-colonial theory and feminist theory, are they ontologically different? Can you combine them? Whereas that's why I said, both are critical theories, blah, blah, blah. So ontologically, you need to have the same kind of assumptions between these theories for it to be used together. So there was one really interesting article written by Maitri Wickramasinghe, Professor Maitri Wickramasinghe, on the ontology, that gender is ontology and gender is epistemology, whereas she looked at, gender is a way of being and way of seeing. So that was a methodological argument of being and seeing, and hence ontology of gender is epistemology of gender when it comes to gender studies in Sri Lanka. That's what she was trying to argue. So yes, theories when combined have to have that lens, but if it is an interpretive theory, still it can be used, I feel. Functionalist theories are very difficult to use as critical lenses. But if you are somebody who is an authority in the area, if you are an experienced researcher, experienced in publications, I've seen those experienced researchers using functionalist theories to present interpretive or critical research as organizing categories. They can use it, but I think as novice researchers, I wouldn't actually recommend it for myself even at this stage. So we need to look at the combining of these ontologies. Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions from others?
Yes, Sawandi, I don't have any question to ask, but it is so interesting listening all this.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it is interesting.
Thank you, Miss.
And I was also thinking it's because there are a lot of BBA students and maybe a few PhD and MBA students. Your explanation also, I thought, gave them a glimpse of your PhD journey. How you have to read, and how these readings will take you in different directions, and finding a theory itself. I'm sure with your explanation, the audience would have understood how much of reading that you have done and the different paths that you were taken into. So I thought it's a very good sort of way, sort of advice, indirect advice that you also gave to the students of the need to read and be more engaged with the theories and the philosophies and all of that. So yeah,
absolutely. There's one question here, if I don't mind putting it here. what is a debate that should be read before can the subaltern speak? If you read Can the Subaltern Speak, the reference is there for that particular debate. Yes, Dinuka Miss. Dinuka Miss or Dinuka? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was also thinking. Dinuka or Dinuka.
Is this Dinuka?
It's with Dinuka.
Dinuka Padikiriyachi. Yes. Yes, Dinuka.
Okay, no, I think I have this question for Rosha Madam also. I see, I'm coming from a business point of view, from organization point of view. There are a lot of, assessment, a lot of, sort of programs running to understand gender in organizations, and they most from listening to you then and now, I feel they're more focused on gender in organization than gendering in organization. I think Irosha Madam and me was also crossed our paths in some activity, and there also I saw so much of focus on gender in organization and not actually looking at the bigger picture, I feel, which is the gender in organization. Why do you think it had not caught up in these type of activities? Why are we still stuck in numbers and stuck in looking at head counts?
Very good question. Very good question. That has to do with how the world works. Because when it comes to management, if you look at the dominant forms of thinking in management, is functionalist. And if you take journal publications, within the US being very dominant, is positivistic and also functionalist. We see critical perspectives very much in European journals, European, because critical perspectives develop there. When it comes to Karl Marx, when it comes to Michel Foucault, whether it is Derrida, all these philosophers, critical philosophers, or whether even if you take the what's this school of critical theory, Frankfurt School of critical theory, which actually started critical theory, came from Europe. So when the dominant world agenda is very much US, and the knowledge is very much coming from the US, and the methodologies are very dominant, thinking very dominant, management is actually US management. So we are not actually trying to change systems. We are more like trying to reform the system. So reforming the system is what gender in organizations are actually doing. So they don't want to shake the apple cart, or they don't want to shake a lot of things up. So they want to see how can we do things better in a different, that's easier. So gender in organizations is easier, and you can get people off your backs soon. Okay, we have more numbers here, therefore that's over and done with. And a lot of research is focused on these elements. Gender in organizations is a critical perspective, and if you look at critical research is very marginal in the world. So that's why critical researchers are less, and research publication outlets are also less when it comes to critical research. And if you look at their conferences and journals, there is a critical researchers find functional researchers to be they have a problem with it, and functional researchers find problem with critical researchers because they are not functional. So none of them can publish in their journals, none of them speak to each other, and they have different agendas, and that's how things happen. And of course, as I want to mention, the training of critical researchers are very less. It happens mostly in European Europe, and even Australia there is some, but when it comes to US, it's mostly functionalist and positivistic kind of research being developed, and they are the most dominant forms of knowledge. Short and sweet, if I don't know if it's short.
Yeah, to that, I suppose to that, Dinuka. Yeah, so well, I do receive liking what you want to do, your ultimate goal, the goal of the researcher, the training of the researcher, like Sewandi said, all of that matters, but I don't think there is something, one is better than the other, or, all depends on the ultimate goal, the researcher.
Miss, we missed your
disconnected.
yes.
Yeah, yes, I disconnected. So I was saying that everything depends on the ultimate goal of the researcher, I suppose. So whether you do research in gender in management or gender in management, all that do contribute. And maybe the contribution is different at different levels, but still there is a contribution. So if you are more of a critical researcher, then of course gendering management would be the one for you, but maybe interpretivist, maybe social constructionist or a functionalist, gendering management is for you. So yeah, so that just to add to what Sewandi was saying.
And also, Miss, I think when it comes to policy, gender in management, or gender theorizing, the functional way of theorizing gender actually has a lot of policy changes when it comes to, even if you look at Sri Lanka, where they were trying to get more people in parliament through these increasing number of women in local governance. Those are also actually taking place at policy level through this forms of research and discussions and in activism that's taking place, where we put that in gender in organization category. So there is social change taking place even with those. So absolutely, it is essential. All forms of theorizing is essential. Absolutely.
Essential. And it can be more easily understood by the practitioners, I suppose.
Absolutely.
The research that you do in gender in management. And when you deal with practitioners a lot, well, yeah. I hope we answered you, Dinuka.
The question actually stemmed from the fact that I have a doubt whether by making sure that you have female representation or gender representation in organizations would address the problem that we are trying to address. Because in my opinion, checking how many senior managers we have who are females is just making numbers. Whether they have a role to play, whether they are accepted, or what type of responsibility they carry. Do they share the equal space in boardroom with the male counterparts? I think those things are not even really looked at in some of the cases, but just too hung up with numbers. And if you don't have the number, that means you are not balanced in gender. I don't know whether you can actually come into that claim by just looking at numbers. That's the whole point of dissatisfaction.
Shall I share something, Dinuka? Yeah. So interesting that, the point what you are raising, what is really happening in the organizations, what the role that women and men are playing. So it's common, right? So the organizational point of view, right? What the organizational expectations, it should be achieved by the person who is in a position, right? There is no just a bias for male or female. The role that you play, right? The way that you are playing, the way you are interacting with others to achieve the goal is very important. So anyone, if you are interested in doing a research, right, in that point, you can see how these people are playing a role in an organization, whether male or female, how the things are happening, where the things are going wrong. So that would be a good research to bring outcomes to solve many problems. In my point of view, that's why I am looking at, right? So that there is no any gender, but maybe due to the gender, there are a lot of issues, might be challenges coming in for male or female, somewhere some female or male playing a different role to misdirect the things, the way to achieve things. So there are a lot of issues. So that area could be do the research, yes. It is interesting, yes. But no, gender is not the matter. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Jamis. I think this is another discussion we need to have separately on a separate date, because there is a lot of discussion around what you said, Dinuk, and what Senator Jamis said. So we'll see if we can have that longer discussion on this later on. If there are no other questions, I think we've passed allocated time by 4 minutes. So any final questions?
Arosha, madam?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm Dulipa here.
Yes,
not a question, actually. Thank you very much, Sevandi Miss and HR department for organizing this great session. So feminism and this feminist theory is, something new for me and not related to my area, but I thought of joining and getting the knowledge about this topic. So after, joining this session, I found it very interesting area to explore. So, and I was focusing on each and every word said by Sevandi madam, because that presentation was very attractive and, focus taking. So thank you very much again. And I'm looking forward to attend the next sessions as well. Thank you very much again for your, kind, dedication.
Thank you, Dulipa. I'm glad you came, even though it is not in your area. That is the way that we can expand our thinking.
Yes, because at the moment I got this mail, I thought of joining because this is something new for me. I thought of joining because I have seen a lot of, in our HR department, they're talking about this feminism, gender and all. So I thought of joining and get the sense of it. Thank you very much.
To see what the fuss is all about.
Thank you. So one more request, if you can share me some of the seminal work, because sometimes it's very difficult to access some of the seminal work. If you have, and if you can share them with us, we will see if we can make them available to the participants if you make a request from us.
Yes.
And I will also...
Yeah. Arosha, please share it.
Yes.
Dr. Seva, I also wanted to request those references. I was just waiting till my turn comes. Thank you. And thank you for the great session.
Thank you. There's a lot of references actually that I actually used. I can share these slides with you all, not a problem. If you all tell me what you want, I might be able to share it with you. That will be easier, neither.
Yes.
Because there's so many here already.
Yes. Some we may be able to trace and find them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you again, Sevandi.
Thank you, Miss, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. So the first session of this series was a hit from the feedback that we are getting. So hopefully we will be able to maintain the same momentum in the future sessions as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating, and hope to see you all in the next session as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.